各位，在以台湾、乌克兰和中美竞争为背景的分析下，美国智库抛出了一个尖锐的问题：如果中国与美国真的爆发大国冲突，谁的国防工业更能撑得住呢？这不是简单的比较预算或者舰艇的数量，而是评估两国能否在一场持续多年的战争中维持生产和威慑。报告首先从乌克兰战争切入，指出美国国防工业的补给困难。在战争的第一年，美国向乌克兰提供的标枪数量相当于7年的产量，毒刺导弹的转让量接近过去20年非美客户总需求，而最关键的155毫米炮弹在几个月内就消耗了一大半库存。美国智库警告，现代战争不再是几周，而可能是数年。美国的工业基础必须具备长期补给的能力，否则连威慑都站不住。随后，他们把视角转向亚洲，中国在台湾周边进行多轮的模拟封锁与两栖作战演习，并快速增加舰艇、导弹与无人机的部署。这些行动并非象征式的展示，而更像是军事的排练。历史学者保罗·肯尼迪曾强调，在持久战中获胜的往往不是武器性能最好的一方，而是生产能力最强的一方。这引出的核心问题是，中国的国防工业正在变得更像战时体系。美国智库数据指出，全球收入排名前5的军工集团中，有3到5家来自中国，而10年前，中国军工企业在100强榜里面是0。如今，中国在舰艇、火炮、坦克和无人机等多个领域的产量已经对美国形成压迫。尤其是造船，中国占全球产能的 53%， 而美国不到 1%。 某些中国单一船厂的产能甚至超过美国全国。从空中力量方面，美国依然保持着第5代战机数量领先，但中国的航空工业扩张速度惊人，解放军现役飞机超过3150架，4代与5代战机已经突破2000架。而这一数字在2017年只有800架。美国智库认为差距正在加速的缩小，但报告中并没有忽视中国的问题。解放军缺乏真实作战经验，大型国企存在效率低下和腐败的问题，供应链也存在潜在的漏洞。正因为如此，美国智库进行了几十次台湾冲突兵棋推演，结果显示，美国在冲突的首周就有可能耗尽核心远程反舰导弹，关键空对地导弹也会在1周内枯竭，而补产周期有可能长达2年。这意味着，即使美国技术领先，但从补给的速度来看，依然存在风险的状态。结论是，2027年将是关键的节点。习近平要求解放军具备应对冲突的能力。而美国在那个时间点，工业基础可能无法支撑长期的战争。这并不意味着战争会发生，但意味着威慑的基础，也就是持久战能力面对挑战。美国智库最终的问题不是在于谁会赢，而是美国和盟友能否在2027年以前，为一个可能永远不会发生，但必须足够可信的战争建立足够强的威慑呢？让我们看一下视频。
China's defense spending is soaring, and its defense industry is on a wartime footing. It is rapidly developing and producing weapon systems designed to deter the United States, and if deterrence fails, to emerge victorious in a great power war against the United States. China has already caught up to the U.S. in its ability to produce weapons at mass and scale in some areas. As part of my book, The American Edge, we're now going to ask, is China's defense and its defense industry stronger than the US's? And to help us answer that question, let's first move to the Ukraine war. So one of the most significant indications that the US has challenges with its defense industry is in Ukraine. So here we see the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the front lines, the pushes by various Russian forces. The quantities of Javelin, as the U.S. discovers as it's providing assistance to Ukraine, the quantity of Javelin anti-missile systems transferred by the U.S. to Ukraine during part of the first year of the war, so through August 2022, represents 7 years of production at fiscal year 2022 rates. The number of Stinger missiles that the U.S. transfers to Ukraine was roughly equal to the total number built for all non-U.S. customers in the previous 20 years. And one of the most lethal weapons systems that the U.S. sends and the Ukrainians ask for are 155 millimeter howitzers, which fire high explosive ammunition weighing about 100 pounds each and able to hit targets nearly 20 miles away. By December 2022, first year of the war, the U.S. military provides Ukraine with up to 1,004,000 rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition, significantly shrinking the availability of 155 millimeter rounds in the U.S. storage. So what becomes very important to understand and really starts to dawn on U.S. defense and acquisition planners in the Pentagon is that a great power war, including a war with China, could be protracted. That is, as the war in Russia goes from 1 year to 2 to 3 to 4, not just weeks or months, but years. And to fight a protracted war, or even to deter one in the first place, the U.S. defense industrial base needs to be able to provide weapon systems and other material for a prolonged period of time. So deterrence even requires the ability to fight a protracted war. This becomes particularly concerning with the People's Liberation Army activity in and around Taiwan. So here we see a map of several of the People's Liberation Army, these are Chinese exercises around Taiwan. As we see in the map of 2024, and then as occurs later in 2025, the Chinese involved a range of exercises here. This is around the island of Taiwan. Exercises, but are really military rehearsals is probably a fair way to put it. These included a series of joint sword exercises where the Chinese exercises blockades, and then what a conventional war, including an invasion, might look like. These exercises were followed by exercises that, like the Straight Thunder 2025A in the year 2025, and the number of Chinese exercises that they conduct, along with the buildup that the Chinese are doing, are clear indications that the threat in the Pacific to the United States, Japan, the Philippines, and other countries is becoming more significant. So why is all of this important? So as Paul Kennedy, the Yale historian, explains in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, success in a long, drawn-out, protracted great power war often goes to the side with a more flourishing, productive base. This is important not just for war fighting, but also for being able to deter war from even happening in the first place. So the other side, the adversary, needs to know that if war were to happen, your side is prepared to conduct a protracted war. So let's start with the capabilities, essentially the military balance between the U.S. and China. So as we look at Chinese and U.S. capabilities, in the figure behind me, the good news for now with the initial question I asked is that the U.S. industrial base still has significant strengths. If you look at this chart, defense spending by the U.S. is still larger than China's, although that gap is shrinking. But the trend lines are interesting. China has caught up to, and in some cases even surpassed, the U.S. in some areas. For example, China has more principal surface combatants. So we see a range of areas where the Chinese surface combatants, in terms of hulls, has exceeded those of the U.S. Main battle tanks, artillery systems. The U.S. is still dominant in such areas as aircraft carriers, submarines, particularly nuclear-powered submarines, fourth and fifth generation aircraft, and then nuclear weapons. But still, the main storyline of China's defense buildup is clear. China is catching up to the United States in all the major military domains, in the maritime, land, air, space, cyber, and then nuclear. And it is building a force to deter and fight the United States if deterrence fails. So let's look at some of what China has done. If you look at its defense companies that are producing weapons today, China has poured money into its defense industry. Today, 5 of the world's top largest companies, as measured in combined defense and non-defense revenue, are Chinese enterprises, including the top 2 companies that we can see here at the top, the Aviation Industry Corporation of China and China State Shipbuilding Corporation Limited. Now, what's interesting is this ranking is a massive change from a decade earlier, when there were 0 Chinese defense companies in the entire list of the top 100 companies. 0 Chinese companies in the list of top 100 defense companies a decade ago. In defense revenues alone, now, China has 5 companies in that top 10, also up from 0 a decade earlier. So across the board, China is on a wartime footing. What does that mean? So let's look at a couple of areas to gauge Chinese defense industrial production capacity. One clear example is shipbuilding. China is building ships and dominating the shipbuilding market compared to the United States. As you can see in the chart, the U.S. accounts for about 0.1% of global shipbuilding. 0.1%. Japan, 13%. South Korea, 29%. And on the far right of the screen here, we see China just over 53% of total shipbuilding. This is both military and commercial. So China is dominating the shipbuilding market. U.S. plays a very small role. And remember, in the last segment that we looked at, U.S. naval production and shipbuilding during World War II, the U.S. was producing, over the course of the war, massive numbers of ships. So that is fundamentally different from that period to today. So what does that look like in total numbers? Today, China has the capacity to build 23 million tons of vessels compared to less than 100,000 in the United States. And that's at shipyards in China run by a number of major companies. In the US, we've got General Dynamics, Huntington Ingalls, and other companies. According to US naval estimates, this is Navy intelligence estimates, a single Chinese shipyard, such as Shangjing Island, located on China's east coast, has more capacity than all US shipyards combined. The PLA Navy's growth has made it the largest Navy in the world, and it produces a wide range of naval combatants. That includes submarines, surface combatants, unmanned or uncrewed systems, gas turbine and diesel engines, and shipboard weapons and electronic systems. In addition, let's look next at a couple of other areas as well. One of them, as you can see here, is the J-35 and aircraft. So the air domain. We're seeing the Chinese build a growing number of aircraft, 3,150, particularly in the air domain. The U.S. has the most and the largest advanced fleet of fifth-generation aircraft in the world. That's both fighters and bombers, led by Lockheed Martin with the F-35 and the F-22, and then Northrop Grumman with the B-21 bomber. But China is catching up. China's largest defense aviation company is the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, or AVIC. By 2024, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, had produced over 3,150 total aircraft, so that gap is shrinking between the U.S. and China. This number includes over 2,000 fourth and fifth generation combat aircraft, more than doubling the 800 that China had in 2017. We see a big increase in aircraft production. Among these were 205th generation J-20 multi-role fighter aircraft. We also see ones here like the J-35. And China is also increasingly producing drones, which it begins to use in exercises around Taiwan, including the ones we saw at the beginning of it, the Joint Sword exercises. China was also ramping up, including with its rocket forces, the production of cruise, ballistic, and hypersonic missiles. So let's also take a look at the broader land domain. The Chinese parade in 2025 highlights many of these systems. These are land systems. These are tanks behind me. Overall, the PLA Army has the world's largest ground force, led by China North Industries Group Corporation and China's South Industries Group Corporation. China's production capacity has increased in nearly every PLA ground system category. So think main and light battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, assault vehicles, air defense and artillery systems, and broader artillery. Yet the PLA does have problems. It's not a 10-foot tall giant. It suffers from what some call peace disease, a lack of combat experience since the 1979 Sino-Vietnamese War. China's defense industry and the People's Liberation Army more broadly also face other challenges: corruption within the system, lack of efficiency, particularly with state-owned enterprises, and major supply chain vulnerabilities. So to help understand both the Chinese and the U.S. defense challenges, one of the things CSIS has done here is conduct a number of war games around Taiwan, including examining blockade scenarios, conventional war, that's a Chinese amphibious invasion, and even nuclear use. So what do games like this show us? Let's see the numbers. One of the things is that our war games continue to show challenges with U.S. defense production. So let's talk about munitions here. The U.S. military typically exhausts in our war games its inventory of long-range anti-ship missiles within the first week of a Taiwan conflict. And it runs out of joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, extended range, after a month. Taiwan also uses up its inventory of anti-ship cruise missiles after a week. So you actually see by day 6, 7, 8, and certainly 9, U.S. is out of Schlitz here. It would be very difficult in this environment to sustain a fight without these types of weapons. Those long-range anti-ship missiles are particularly useful in a Taiwan Strait conflict because of their ability to strike Chinese naval forces that may be bringing in material and soldiers to Taiwan from outside the range of Chinese air defenses. The production timelines for producing advanced munitions can be 2 years or more, so there are no quick solutions. So where do we go from here, and where does it leave us? It leaves us with a very difficult situation where Xi Jinping has asked his military to be ready for a conflict by 2027. That doesn't mean a conflict will occur, but to be prepared. And rather than fighting per se, I think the Chinese would prefer not to fight, but they're prepared at least to deter, and if deterrence fails, they're prepared to fight. So the reality for the U.S. is that its industrial base, in that time period, that 2027 time period, it is not able to sustain a protracted conflict against China in and around Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, and other regions. And it raises major questions about whether U.S. deterrence, the ability to deter China from conducting an operation in Taiwan, Philippines, South China Sea, or other areas, would be successful. So given what we've just seen with China, how do we get the U.S. and the allied industrial bases to a position where they can effectively deter? And if deterrence fails, they could win and they could fight and successfully win a great power war.